So, when you think about James Monroe, you probably think of him as the fifth U.S. president, right? The last of that founding fathers generation to hold the office. The guy behind the Monroe Doctrine. But what if I told you that's only part of the picture? There's a whole other side to his story, one that's connected to everything we know, but makes it all so much more complicated. On one hand, he was hailed as a revered Virginia statesman, a real hero of the new American nation. But at the exact same time, he was a lifelong plantation owner. His entire lifestyle, his wealth, it was all built on the labor of people he enslaved. Now, these two legacies might seem like they're totally at odds, but as we're about to see, they were really just two sides of the very same coin. All right, so let's start with the story most of us are familiar with, the heroic one. Because make no mistake, Monroe was absolutely a key player in America's founding generation. He was born in Virginia, and when the Revolutionary War broke out, he didn't hesitate. At just 18 years old, he actually dropped out of college to go join the Continental Army. And he was right there in the thick of it for some of the most famous moments of the war, crossing the Delaware with Washington, getting badly wounded at the Battle of Trenton, and even surviving that absolutely brutal winter at Valley Forge. The guy was all in. And you better believe people noticed his dedication. I mean, he got the highest possible praise from the commander-in-chief himself. George Washington called him a brave, active, and sensible officer. That kind of endorsement, coming from Washington, that became the foundation for his entire public career. Okay, so he's a celebrated war hero. What's next? Well, this is where Monroe the soldier becomes Monroe the statesman. And his rise through the government of this new nation was honestly nothing short of spectacular. I mean, just look at this resume. It's kind of hard to believe one person did all this. He was in the Continental Congress, a U.S. senator, served as governor of Virginia 4 times. He was a diplomat to France, Britain, and Spain. He was one of the key guys who made the Louisiana Purchase happen. And get this, at one point, he was serving as both Secretary of State and Secretary of War at the same time. It's like he held every important job there was. So it's really no surprise that by the time he became president, the country was kind of breathing a sigh of relief. His 2 terms in office became known as the era of good feelings. And it really was, a time when all the intense political fighting seemed to calm down, and this new sense of American pride and unity was taking hold. And that confidence really showed in his foreign policy. The perfect example is the Monroe Doctrine. This was a hugely bold statement. He basically drew a line in the sand and told the world, hey, European powers, the Western Hemisphere is our backyard now, stay out. For a young country, that was a massive declaration on the world stage. But that legacy, the war hero, the statesman, the confident president, that's only half the story. Now we have to turn to the other legacy, the one that's been hidden in the shadows for a long, long time. 178. Let that number sink in for a second. That's not a treaty number or how many votes he won by. It's the number of individual, human beings that we now know were enslaved by James Monroe during his life. So how do we even know this specific number? Well, it's because of some absolutely groundbreaking research published in the Journal of Slavery and Data Preservation. Historians and scholars have spent years just painstakingly going through scattered records to piece together this more complete and much more difficult picture. You see, while Monroe was building this incredible public career, he was also always a Virginia planter. And what that meant back then was that his wealth, his social standing, even his ability to take all those unpaid or low-paid public service jobs, all of it was made possible by the forced labor of enslaved people on his properties. And the way researchers uncovered these stories is, well, it's just heartbreaking. It wasn't from detailed diaries or compassionate letters. It was from things like account books, bills of sale, wills, and even ads for people who had run away. These documents showed the cold, hard reality of slavery, where human beings were listed right alongside furniture and livestock as financial assets. And this is the most important part to understand. His 2 lives, the public president and the private plantation owner, they weren't separate. They were completely, totally intertwined. One directly fed the other. Think about this. As president, Monroe signs the Missouri Compromise, a huge national policy decision about how to manage the expansion of slavery. Then, just a few years later in his private life, he makes a business decision to sell entire families he enslaved at his Highland plantation, shipping them away from everything they knew to the brutal new cotton plantations down in Florida. And the researchers who compiled this data, they put it perfectly. They said this shows Monroe's simultaneous role as politician and plantation owner. You can't separate the two. his political decisions about the nation's economy were directly shaped by his personal financial stake in that same economy. So, where does this leave us? What do we do with this more complete, more challenging knowledge? How does it change the way we remember the past? Well, places like Monroe's own plantation, Highland, are now doing what the researchers call a quietly revolutionary act. They're actively working to tell the stories of all the people who lived there. They're giving the lives of the people Monroe enslaved the same historical weight as the life of the president. It's about telling the whole unvarnished truth. And it's so important to remember that this work is far from over. History isn't just a dusty book of facts. It's an ongoing process of discovery. Researchers are still learning more about these 178 people, and honestly, that number is probably going to grow as more information comes to light. So that leaves us with a really big question to think about. How does knowing the full story, not just about the famous person who owned the house, but about every single person who lived and worked and suffered on that land, how does that change our view of a historic place? And maybe more importantly, how does it change our view of our own nation's history?